everyone. Enjoy your day and your life. All my love to you and yours. Your great Auntie Sylvia. Hi there. I'm Sylvia Dante. Welcome to my world. I am the great aunt of Matthew Sherman, and I am dedicating this to Matthew on the day of his bar mitzvah. Matthew, I wish you a long, happy, and healthy life. These words and history are dedicated to you. Gershon Freistadt, my mother's father, came over to Omaha, Nebraska from Chernihiv gubernia in Russia in early 1920s. In Omaha lived a brother of his wife, Hannah Basha, named Horowitz. He had to leave Russia because he had performed a circumcision on a Jewish baby, and the father of the child reported him to the authorities. Gershon's oldest daughter of 8 children, Mara, had heard this, as she was rather connected politically, and alerted her father of this danger. So he left with 3 of his youngest sons, Meyer, Jan, and Nathan. I don't know when Hannah Basha, his wife, came over. My mother, Hinda, was too old to be able to come legally. Her sister, Sarah, who was studying to be a doctor, did not want to come, and Hinda, who was always the compliant one, went in her place at the bidding of her father. Hinda had a boyfriend and was also unhappy to go. Hinda had attended the gymnasium, which is equivalent to 2 years of college here, so she was literate in Russian. It was highly unusual for Jews at that time to have the money to educate women, but Gershon had educated all his children, and all of the older children went on to higher learning. That would have been Leba, Avram, Sarah, and Mara, who were left in Russia. Gershon was a chazan, a kosher butcher or a shochet, and a religious Jew. When he later moved to Baltimore, he became the chazan of the Auchentrawley Terrace Synagogue. Hinda came to Baltimore in 1925. She went to a Yiddish concert in Baltimore with her brother Meyer. My father, Joseph Commandant, was conducting. He had signed a contract to conduct this concert and failed to read it carefully, which said he had to compose the music as well as conduct. And so was born Batya's Chasana and its music. It took me 10 years to find that music after my father died. The basement of our old home was filled with music. The basement was a sore point for my mother, since my father had spent many years in the basement with his original and symphony music for the Akron Symphony, which he conducted. I donated the original music to the University of Pennsylvania's Yiddish library some years ago. When my father saw my mother in the audience of his concert, she had resembled an old love of his named Lola, and he held up the concert for 20 minutes in order to meet her, because after the concert he couldn't have controlled the audience. My father went up to Meyer, Hinda's brother, and asked if she was single or married. Meyer said, "Neither. She's my sister." And 6 months later, after letters being written against my father by one of my mother's suitors, they were married in Baltimore by Gershon, Hinda's father, on February 26, 1926. Yosef Commandant changed his name to Yasha Danidov before their first child, Ann Lee, or Layla, was born in Akron, Ohio in 1929. Later, he changed his name to Dante so that his daughter would be called Andante, a term in music which described her perfectly as slow, steady, and moderate. At our home in Akron, there were Jewish salons, that means evenings of music, every couple of weeks, with my father at the piano, Bob Wollman on the violin, and my mother singing Russian and Yiddish songs. I would sneak out of my bed and watch them through the stair rail from up above and would be told to return to bed. Back to my father's history. Kremenets-Podolsk is where he was born. This is the city of violinists. Both Misha Elman and Isaac Stern came from this city. He was a child prodigy at 6 on the cornet, a sweeter sound than the trumpet. He traveled to Europe and other places. His family were all musicians. Later, he was offered a scholarship at the then famous Kishinev Royal Conservatory of Music. He later did go to the conservatory and went through 8 years in 1 year. He was acclaimed a genius. He was born in 1886. Here are some pictures. He became an officer in the First World War and was imprisoned as a czarist. He had been a band leader in that war. When he was imprisoned, he got typhus and was presumed dead. The dead were thrown into a lime pit. My father was seen moving in the lime pit, and a black man somehow passing pulled him out and saved his life. Years later, in 1960s and 70s in Akron, it was not all customary to have black persons in your house, but my father was giving music lessons to a black chap. After my father had died, this young person returned to the house and brought back an umbrella that my father had loaned him and the money for his lesson. Kind of poetic, huh? Joseph Dante was made a government conductor of Poland, a Jew, because the highest dignitary of that city had a favorite piece of music that no one could play but my father. Much later, Sylvia was born in 1934. That's me. When I was born, on the birth certificate it read, baby girl Dante. Since my Jewish name is Sarah and my mother already had a sister Sarah, under Jewish law I could not be named Sylvia. But later, my father, as usual, won his argument on the name. The same thing happened with Ann Lee, but later my mother's name was also Hannah or Ann, so that is why we all called her Layla and not Ann. And they say names are now very important to who you are and are not accidental. My father's immediate family were all burned alive in their home in what was then Russia, Poland. One niece, Manya, to whom my father had given piano lessons, escaped from the house. She was pregnant and walked across countries to get to Israel. Her baby died, but she did make it to Israel and was reunited with her husband Avram in Israel. Avram was a musician, and my father sent him a saxophone so that he could make a living. I visited them many times in Israel. Manya always slept with one foot touching the floor so she could always run. In Akron, early on, my father supplied music for a dance studio, and they offered to give free lessons to one of his daughters. I, at 1.5, was more assertive than my sister at 6. My father was also schooled as a prodigy, so he was comfortable starting me before I could walk or talk. My parents' language between them was Russian, but my father said, in a Jewish home you speak Yiddish, so my sister, when she went to school, could not speak English. But I had learned English from my dance and elocution teacher. At 2.5, my picture was shown to a Warner Brothers person by my father's best friend Samuelson from Baltimore. This was for a contest to find the second Shirley Temple, since she had now grown up. I won that contest, and it was headlined on the New York Post. Here is that headline. My mother took me back to Akron. It was hard enough that her husband was a musician, let alone her daughter should be an actress. She said they called 5 or 6 times and then they stopped. At 2.5, I was a star. At 3, a has-been. But I never stopped wanting to act my whole life, and it is still that which I love the most. Here are 2 plays, Golda's Balcony the autobiography of Golda Meir. Golda's Balcony is a one-woman show I performed at Beth El Synagogue in Durham, North Carolina, for the benefit of a young girl, Corey, who recently was given a double lung transplant and is now doing very well. I'm old. I'm tired. I'm sick. Dying, the doctors tell me. So at the end of the story, I'll be a long time dead and forgotten, and who'll care about me and my stories? But they lead up to one terrible question, which won't die. This picture everyone has of me, Mama Golda, who makes chicken soup for her soldiers. It's a nice picture, and I do make chicken soup. But let's empty it all out for keeps. Right now, at the bottom of the pot is blood. At crossing Delancey. Tell me the truth. You have you out with a boy sometime?
Sure. I have plenty of boyfriends.
Plenty. You don't need plenty. You only need one. I don't see nobody. Who you got?
I haven't brought anybody to meet you yet. They're, just friends. Nothing serious yet.
Oh, listen, my girl. Friends is friends. And you can do this with them. But a husband is a husband. And maybe you're crazy.
And if I did, you wouldn't be a pickle man.
Oh, ho, ho, ho. Miss Universe on the high horse. He's just looking, my dear. He didn't ask to buy it. Matthew, I need to tell you something about your great-grandmother. She is a lot like your Aunt Debbie. Warm, giving, kind, and generous. My mother is the finest person I've ever met in my life, and boy, it feels good to say that. Here is a picture of my grandparents, Gershon and Chana Basha, my father and mother, Joseph and Hinda, and my sister Layla and me. By the way, my father adored my mother and showed affection to her all the time. My mother, Layla, and I would go every Pesach to Baltimore to be with our grandparents. My father would teach us music for each Pesach, and he taught us my grandfather's niggin, which means song. Here is the melody. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, la la, ya la la, ya la, ya la la. Ya la 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 la. At the Seder, which took place during the war years, there were always many people from different services in the Army and Navy. Debbie mentioned she did the same thing at her home in Haifa. Nice round robin, eh? Layla went to Akron University for secretarial science, and I went to Carnegie Mellon for theater. Layla, my sister, worked both for Israel as a professional as well as a volunteer. She was the head of Pioneer Women and was very dedicated for Israel. It's not an accident today that her daughter is living in Israel. Also, she was very loved by her family, and the last years were not easy. She was ill, but she was surrounded by love. My father died of angina in 1960, and my mother died of cancer in 1973. I want you to know how I have been blessed. 6 or 7 years ago, I was planning to go to Israel for a bar mitzvah, and they detected a pituitary brain tumor. After several months, it consumed itself and disappeared. Today, it is even more microscopic. I also got rid of diabetes and gallbladder disease, and a broken back healed. Today, I am missing your bar mitzvah, Matthew, because I have had screws and bolts put in my right ankle so that I can walk without canes for the first time in 12 years. I just wanted to share some of my blessings. I design art programs for hospitals, and luckily I enjoy that too. I hope, Matthew, you always enjoy what you do. Oh, forgot to tell you that we are related to the poet Heine, the grandmother of Karl Marx, and Vladimir Horowitz. So my dear one, this is all for you and your wonderful day and your family and the generations of all of our families together. I love you, your Auntie, Sylvia.